Thank you for having me. I don't know if everyone is aware, but this has been 2 years in the making. And we are finally here and ready to go. So, just going to make sure your screen is shared. There. Okay, there you go. So thank you all for coming. I thought what I would do is kind of base it on what we normally get asked. So for those of you who may not know who we are, the Sequoya National Research Center is on the campus of the University of Arkansas Little Rock, and we are the world's largest archival collection of Native American newspapers and periodicals. We are not a genealogy research center, but that's probably one of our most asked questions. So we have put together some things to kind of protect ourselves and get people on the right direction and the right path. So 95% of the questions that we get asked about genealogy relates to Cherokee genealogy. So my talk is going to be heavy on Cherokee, but feel free to ask other questions if you have them. So some of the stories that we hear, how many of you in the audience have a family story of Native American ancestry? So we do have a few people who have a family story. Well, I am 1/4 Yupik Eskimo from Alaska. My grandmother is full-blooded. But on the other side of my family, I do have a story that my grandmother tells. We are part Cherokee. And so growing up, I just believed her and took her at her word. So then, as I got older and more knowledgeable, I asked her, so why do you say this? Like, what is the basis of this, not of this information? She couldn't tell me. There was absolutely no concrete evidence to support that claim. So I think it's just one of those, I'm one of you. I'm one of those people that have that same story. So going into it, I wanted to talk about some initial considerations when you are doing Native American genealogy. My boss, Dr. Littlefield, has this quote that I love to share, and he says, "All family stories come with a grain of truth. It just might not be the one you think it is." So it's very possible that that story that you have been told, there is some truth to it, but it might not be the one you think it is. Another thing to consider is, are you looking for an Indian or are you looking for your ancestry? And those have two different outcomes. And then here's another caveat. You will hit a dead end. If you're looking at Plains Indians ancestry, the brick wall will come whenever you get to the reservation period, because before the reservations existed, they did not keep rolls of their own people because they knew who they were. And then the second thing is that if you're talking about the 5 so-called civilized tribes, you will reach a dead end when you get to the time before removal. And we'll talk more about that. So the very first step, you start the same way you do with any other form of ancestry. You want to evaluate the facts that you have. So you want to make sure you've got names, dates, marriages, especially when you're looking at your possible Native ancestors. You'll also want to look at geographic locations, because that's really a big deal. Because I hate to break it to you, but if your supposed Indian ancestor came from Forest City, Arkansas, they probably were not truly Indian. There were a lot of people in the early 1900s that decided to have this family story of being Indian. And honestly, I don't know why that is, but it just is. So you'll want to learn the history about those places. So when you first are looking at the facts, your census records are going to be the best place to start. Like Jane told us, start with the earliest or the latest you know and work your way back. So some of the things that you can look at on the census records are, for instance, on the 1900 census, they had a special census for the Indian population. And so if you look at the bottom of the page, there's an additional schedule that talks about the Indian citizens. So in the 1900 census, they asked for the tribe of the individual and both of the parents. Then they also asked questions of degree of mixed blood. And then they asked conjugal status, which in this instance means single, married, or are you living in polygamy? And then they asked questions of, are you taxed and are you a citizen? And these have very different answers depending on what part of the country you're living in. So for instance, the tribes that were removed to Oklahoma, they were taxed and they were citizens. Well, not all of them. Let me take that back. The 5 so-called civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muscogee, Creek, and Seminole, all were citizens and all paid taxes. Those in the plains that were in Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, many of them were not considered citizens of the United States. And then the last question on that 1900 census would have been, what type of dwelling do you live in? And these are all very much stereotypical questions that the federal government asked because they felt like all Indians were uncivilized and they all lived in polygamy and lived in a hut in the middle of nowhere. So you do have to read into that when you're looking at the 1900 census. And then if we move on to the 1910 census, there is also that same bottom section called Special Inquiries Relating to Indians. They have all of the same questions listed in the 1900 census, but they also include what proportion of Indian are you mixed with other blood, and if your choices were Indian, white, and Negro. They also ask another validity question, but it's worded differently, and I feel like it's even more invasive than the first one was. And then, because of the Indian boarding school push, they ask about educational institution, because at that time, many of the Indians that were living on tribal lands and on reservations were being sent to boarding schools to be, well, the motto was kill the Indian and save the man. They wanted to strip the Indian of their cultural identity and force them to forget their language and have an education. So the 1920 census actually asks no questions specifically about Indians. At that point in time, I feel like whenever Jane was talking about the waves of immigration, there was this push, and this was right after World War I, and so there was a push to have just an American identity. And so they don't ask any questions about tribes, but they do ask questions about native tongue. And so, unfortunately, this is too small for you to see, but they do have languages besides the individual, beside their parents, and beside their mother and their father. And for whatever reason, whenever it is an Indian individual, it will say Indian as the tongue, but then it will have it crossed out. I haven't done enough research yet to figure out why they crossed that out, but it is there. In every single instance that I saw with the 1920 census, it was marked out. And then the 1930 census, there still aren't any specific questions about tribe, but they've come back to this realization that no, we really do need to figure out who our Indians are. And so what they will do, especially in an area that has a large Indian population, they will use the second and third columns after the person's place of birth, and they will use that to write in the tribe's name and the blood quantum. So it's really interesting. They're like, well, this is not on here, but we need this information, so they went ahead and wrote it down anyway. So I also mentioned the importance of knowing where your family came from. And this makes a huge difference in whether your family story has legitimacy. So this particular map is the Cherokee land cessions map from 1785 to 1855. And I do have all of these maps on your handout, but this is a little bigger, so it might be easier to read. So as you can see, there are lots of areas where the Cherokees lived in Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. And even like the very, very tip-top northeast part of Mississippi, where the Cherokee people had land that was ceded over to the federal government. And each of those areas of land does have a date on there, so you can see if your family lived there before that time period, there might actually be a legitimate claim to Indian ancestry. So you'll want to start there. The next map is from Georgia counties in 1838. So in 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed into law the Indian Removal Act, which basically forced those 5 tribes that I mentioned from their original homes in the southeast of the United States all to Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. And so in 1835, the Cherokees actually created their own census because they wanted to know how many they had, who they were, and how many were going to be forced to go. And so here are some of the Georgia counties from 1838, which is basically when that removal started and before they went to Indian Territory. And then here is a map of Indian removal, and it shows you in the southeast where those tribes originated. So you've got the Cherokees in basically Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, going to Indian Territory. Then you have the Muskogee Creeks in Georgia and Alabama. The Chickasaws are mostly in Alabama and Mississippi, and then there were a few of them in southern part of Tennessee as well. Then you've got the Choctaws in Alabama and Mississippi, and then the Seminoles are all from the state of Florida. Like I said, about 95% of our ancestry questions do involve Cherokee ancestors, and about the other 5% are Choctaw. I don't think we've ever had anybody come in claiming Seminole ancestry or Muskogee Creek. It's really interesting. And then here's a better map of Indian removal, and this is specifically the trails that the Cherokee Nation traveled on their way to Indian Territory, and every single person that was removed from the southeast traveled through the state of Arkansas. Every single person. One story that we hear a lot is that my ancestor fell off the Trail of Tears. Well, the problem with that story is that they were traveling with their families. They were going to leave their families behind and go out on their own into this wild, unknown wilderness that Arkansas was in the 1830s, and they had no way to support themselves. They were very much an agricultural tribe at that time, and so it's just interesting how we have this, and I've heard it for the entire 11 years I've been at SNRC, is this story of falling off the Trail of Tears. And I will say that when they originated in the Southeast, there were muster rolls that were taken of all the people that were going to be going with a particular contingent. And then when they got to Indian Territory, there was a muster roll that was taken as well. And there were lots of records that involved deaths and sickness that were kept along the way, but those are documented. So the second step is, after you've gotten your facts down, you've got your names, your dates, and your places, you want to develop a research strategy. So what tribe is your ancestor associated with? For instance, the Seminoles, they are a matrilineal tribe, and so in order to become an enrolled citizen, your mother has to be a member of the tribe. There is no other way. Your mother has to be a member of the tribe. Whereas with the Cherokees, your ancestor had to have lived in the Cherokee Nation on June 10th, 1896. If your ancestor is prior to the Dawes Roll, you'll need to go to the Tribal Citizenship Commission. All 5 tribes, well, 4 tribes, minus the Seminoles, did have a Tribal Citizenship Commission, and so if they had somebody wanting to enroll as a citizen of that tribe, there was a process with applications and all of that. So some of the things that you'll want to consider when you're looking at the Dawes Rolls are that, like I said, they had to be a resident of the Cherokee Nation on June 10th, 1896. And they also had to be found on the 1880 authenticated roll. So after the Civil War, many Cherokees were involved in the fighting on both the Union and the Confederate side. And so there was a scattering of people at that time. And so in 1880, they kind of came back together and reunited as one and had this, created this authenticated roll. The Dawes Commission, whenever they set out to create the Dawes Roll, they made public announcements of their enrollment. They provided ample publicity so that everybody was aware of what was happening. And then they worked from the basic rolls of the tribes. So thousands applied who had not been on the rolls before. Not too close.
It's like when trying to listen to its own words up there.
Yeah, I was like, it's okay.
It's not mine, it's mine. See, that's
that I think is better. So every tribe had a baseline roll. With the Cherokees, they had that 1880 authenticated roll that I talked about. Then with the Choctaws, there was an 1885 census. The Chickasaws had an 1890 census, and then Muskogee Creek had 1895 census. So we're using the Dawes Rolls. The index is available for free online, and it's at okhistory.org/research/Dawes, so that is on the screen. You'll want to be able to determine the tribe and category. So each tribe has a different roll on the Dawes Roll. And so if your ancestor is named John Smith and you don't know what tribe that they are a part of, you're going to get hundreds of results. And so you want to have an idea of what tribe they were a part of. Then there are different categories of rolls. There's by blood. There's intermarried, so you could not be a blood citizen of the tribe, but you could be a citizen based on who you married. Then there are freedmen rolls, who are were former slaves or adopted blacks who were part of the tribe. Then you have minor rolls and newborn rolls. So you'll want to find those names of your potential ancestors, and then you'll use the number that you get from the Dawes Rolls Index to find the census card, enrollment card, and application jacket. So here are some of the areas of information that you'll find with the Dawes Rolls records. So with the census cards, those are available on Ancestry.com and on Toll3.com. And you'll find names of the individual, their parents, extended families, where they lived, lots of information. And then for Freedmen, you'll find the applicant's previous owners and the owners of the applicant's parents as well. Then for the enrollment jackets, which are also known as the Dawes applications or testimonial packets, usually these are very large files that have numerous information, including testimonies given by relatives and friends and neighbors of that particular person who is claiming that they are indeed Cherokee in this particular instance. And then the land allotment jacket. So if that person actually received a land allotment, you can find that information on Ancestry and FamilySearch.org, which is free. So here's an example of an enrollment card, and this is for Noah A. Twist. His roll number is 2794, but he also, this is the enrollment card number 1028. And so both of those numbers are very important to remember because you'll use those to look up further information. So on his enrollment card, he is at the top, on that top line, and it's got his age, date of tribal enrollment, what district he was living in, and then it's got his wife and all of his kids listed with all of that same information on there. And then at the bottom, it has even more information, including where his marriage license can be found and other roles that he is found on. So some of them have a ton of information if you're able to find your ancestor. And then this is his application for citizenship in the Cherokee Nation, and he used the Cherokees by blood application because he was claiming that he was a citizen by blood. And so again, it's got the names of his kids, his parents, his wife, just a lot of information. This is only one page of probably, I don't know, there are probably 50 or 60 pages that were included in this application packet that also included testimonials, and it was basically questions and answers that were transcripts typed out. And then lastly, with Noah Twist, this is his allotment application, which tells what piece of land he was allotted, and it gives the entire legal description. And then also on that are his two of his sons. So if you don't have the luck on the Dawes Rolls, there are other options. So there are freedmen lists, like I talked about. There are also adopted Shawnees, adopted Delawares, and adopted whites that were all considered part of the Cherokee Nation at that time. Then we also have the Guy Miller Roll, which was established between 1906 and 1911. And I did hand out that second page handout. Is actually from the state archives. I found it while I was putting this together, and I thought, I'll be sure to pass this along. But it gives you tips about searching the Dawes Rolls and the Guy Miller Roll. It's two-sided, so be sure to take a look at that, because it's going to go into more depth than I am today. So the Guy Miller Roll was basically a roll that was created to decide who should receive reparations. So the Eastern Cherokees made a claim against the United States on May 18th, 1905, and the U.S. ruled in their favor, which resulted in appropriation of $1 million to be distributed to eligible individuals and families. And so the commission received over 125,000 claims, and only about 30,000 were approved. The requirements were that you had to be alive on May 28, 1906, be a member of or descendant of a person forced to remove to Indian Territory, not affiliated with another tribe, and you had to submit an application by August 31st, 1907. So the Guy and Miller roll has a lot of information, just like the Dawes roll does, with names, dates, places of birth, dates of death, birth and death dates of your parents and grandparents, where you lived, etc. Some things to be considered, to think about. So there are also doubtful rolls that were created. And this basically means that you could possibly have been a member with a legitimate claim to the Cherokee Nation, but there is indefinite merit. So you might be, but we can't tell for sure. A rejected citizen, and there are lots of those that applied for citizenship but were rejected because their claims were found to have no merit. And I'll tell you about a database that we have at SNRC. You could also be a citizen by marriage, and you could also be a permitted resident. So other documents that you can also look through are the Dawes Commission correspondence. There are about 80 rolls of microfilm that are available at the center. These consist of loose documents and letterpress books that just includes correspondence to the commission. And most of them say, how do I sign up? So it could be that your family never actually applied, but they asked how to apply. And so that kind of like the game of gossip or telephone, it kind of just spun out of control over the years. Then there are also Cherokee Tribal Citizenship Commission records. We have about 14 rolls at the center, and they roughly cover 1865 to 1910. And 90% of the applicants are from the state of Arkansas. So one project that we have been undertaking for the past several years is called Documenting Arkansas Family Histories. And due to a series of setbacks, this is not available online yet, but we hope that it will be very soon. And basically what it is, we had graduate assistants and interns go through those Tribal Citizenship Commission records and basically create a name index. And so if you've got a name of an ancestor that had this claim of applying for citizenship, this might be gold for you. So as you can see, this is just a screenshot of the database that we created, and it gives where you can find that information on the microfilm roll, first and last name of the person, the date of the document, and the document type, where they were living at the time, and then under notes, we have the kind of, like, what resulted. And I don't think we found one yet that was enrolled as a citizen. As you can see, this whole list were rejected citizens. So they applied, but they did not have a claim. So that very well possibly could be the case of your family story. And then if you still haven't found anything, here are some last resort records that may come up with something. The Cherokee Supreme Court and National Council records contain inquiries about citizenship, applications for citizenship that weren't included in the Tribal Citizenship Commission records or the Dawes Commission records. And then the Cherokee District Court records. Marriage records are kept there, and they would often issue marriage license to Cherokee citizens marrying a fellow Cherokee or a non-citizen, a citizen of the United States. And then permits were also given to workers to work in the Cherokee Nation, businessmen that had business, physicians, missionaries, and teachers. So it's also very possible that your ancestor could have worked in the Cherokee Nation, just not been a citizen. I wanted to turn that timer off before it went off. So, does anybody have any questions for me? I know I gave you a lot of information, and I may or may not be able to answer, but I'll try. Yes, ma'am. So we are open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I'm going to give you a caveat. We are in the process of moving to a new location on campus, to the Fine Arts Building. We are almost there. We have to turn in our keys June 1st to our old place. So before you come, give us till June and give us a call. And I should have brought, oh, actually, I said I should have brought brochures. We're actually out of brochures, but I'll give you the phone number afterwards if you like. Right. Okay. Right. So she's asking if you can make a reservation to come see us. Absolutely. I am actually not the expert on genealogy. Dr. Littlefield, our director, has been doing this for decades. And so I can help you on the basics like I talked about, but if you've got some complicated questions, he would be the person to ask. So feel free to contact us and we can set up an appointment for you to come by. Dr. Littlefield. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I'll say.
Okay.
Who was asking whether or not the yes, but they
yes, we can make sure that the handouts are available to those of you online. One of them is maps that I shared, and then the other is a tip sheet for using the dogs rolls and guiding rolls that's actually from State Archives. But yes, we will make sure that that's available. Anybody else? Okay, thank y'all so much for having me. Oh. The what?
the lovely
I don't believe so. She asked if I'd heard about the Lovely County settlement, and I have not, but again, Dr. Littlefield is the expert, so if you want to send an email, we'll be glad to help you with that. Anybody else? Okay, thank y'all.